I frequently talk about how the United States has a oligarchy. And maybe it's important to understand how power works in America. When people think about power, they think about government. Think about the president, they think about Congress, they think about elections and elected officials. But I think anybody that spends any amount of time thinking about this situation understands that there's a tremendous power of money in politics, because an elected official like the president has to raise $1 billion every 4 years. And who has the money to spend every 4 years $50 million, $100 million, without actually a tangible or direct return on investment? Maybe it's something qualitative, maybe it's something hard to calculate. It's not like, for example, buying a factory. Investing $100 million to buy influence is less tangible. Well, the answer is simple. It's billionaires. Billionaires have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend every 4 years. And you can go on Open Secrets and you can look at the top 10 individual contributors per cycle, and it's fairly consistent. It's people like Miriam Adelson. This cycle, it was Elon Musk, Tim Mellon, Reid Hoffman, a number of others. And so you have to understand about politics that it's a money system. Politics is controlled by money. And what does the money buy? Well, it buys favorable regulatory oversight. It buys favorable treatment in a particular jurisdiction, in a particular state, or from the federal government. And so to create an organizational flowchart, I would say something like this. You've got Congress and the presidency. They actually have to answer to their billionaire donors. Where do billionaires come from? Billionaires come from industries like Silicon Valley, Wall Street. Where do those people come from? Somebody at Silicon Valley comes from Stanford University. Where are all the big Silicon Valley founders and entrepreneurs from? They all come from Stanford University, which is the premier college that's in that area. And so you understand that it's a intelligentsia, academic, money, and political system. And once you understand that we have a system that isn't primarily about elections, then you maybe begin to understand how influence is actually exercised in the country. And I would say that, for the most part, people's understanding of politics is basically correct. I think what they get wrong is they don't see how particular groups or special interests will try to control the bottlenecks or particular choke points in the system. So, for example, a lot of people talk about AIPAC, American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and they like to say, well, when you look at the biggest contributors, the biggest lobbies in politics, AIPAC doesn't tend to show up. But why is that? It's how AIPAC operates. AIPAC doesn't actually do a lot of direct giving to a particular politician. But what they do is they manage a number of different billionaires or high-level millionaires and their political giving. So they'll find the candidate they like, and if that person pledges allegiance to Israel, they'll pick up the phone and they'll call their group of donors, and all those donors will give as individuals. And this way it doesn't show up on the paperwork. This is one of the ways it's concealed and obfuscated. Moreover, in the last cycle in 2024, AIPAC marshaled $100 million to spend. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a ton of money, actually, because billions of dollars are spent across all the different elections, presidential election, congressional elections. But what did AIPAC do specifically? They singled out every congressman that voted against foreign aid to Israel last April, some progressives and one Republican, Thomas Massie. They funneled $100 million, a lot of that money, into those particular races. They funded primary candidates that would take the nomination from the incumbents. And so, for example, in Massachusetts and other states, you had progressive Democrats that took the nomination from an incumbent Democrat congressman. And what they do by focusing on, let's say, a handful of races, singling out, isolating the 3 or 4 congressmen and women that voted against, they make those people lose the election. What they do is create a chilling effect. They don't have to spend millions of dollars in every race. If they spend it in 3, everybody else gets the message, which is they could single you out. They could target you. So a lot of people say it's just not worth the trouble. And this is how you can have AIPAC rally resources in just a few districts, but send a message to all of Congress, which is, if you go against us, if you go against Israel, you will lose your seat. So there's this process of refinement. It's not to say that everybody in Congress is necessarily being bribed to the tune of millions of dollars, but everybody knows the score, which is that in order to be in Congress, you have to pass that check. If you don't, you might be dealing with $20 million from AIPAC funding a primary challenger in your district. And that's just sort of one example of how they'll take a bottleneck or a choke point, and a very determined, motivated, organized, powerful group can have an outsized and disproportionate amount of influence.